Today, we're talking about urgency, which is why I drank 4.5 liters of water before I started filming this video. This is going to require speed, concentration, and no thoughts about running water. Everything that happens in your story needs to have a sense of urgency in some direction. The evil villain's plan, your hero's escape from a desert island, the shipping of your love interests, or the shipping of your protagonist's Amazon order, all of this should happen with a ticking clock. Urgency will almost always improve a plot, but it needs to be approached in the right way. This is not just about making everything linked to a countdown timer or creating thriller levels of time pressure. Urgency requires some nuance and proper application in order to bring real benefits to your story. Urgency, besides adding an excellent tension element to a story, is also important for clearing out plot holes or other story-ruining questions that readers may have. A plot that lacks urgency opens you up to a lot of different plot holes that urgency will fix. Having a proper degree of urgency in your story will encourage characters to take action, it will keep the story from lulling about, and it will get the reader more invested. So let's talk about urgency and do it very quickly. Urgency can perhaps best be described as some kind of time pressure to accomplish a task, either because you really want the result of that task, or because if you wait around, you won't be able to do it. Something like baking a cake has a degree of urgency to it. You need to take the cake out of the oven before it burns. If you wait too long, you're going to end up with a burnt cake. Damn it, that's what I forgot to do yesterday. Urgency can be because a task has an expiration date, or it can be created because of something else that is going to happen that is going to affect the task in some way. Your heroes have 12 hours to disarm the villain's death ray because the evil villain is planning to activate said death ray in 12 hours. Your emotionally available but still somewhat insecure protagonist needs to woo the prom queen before the oafish captain of the football team does so. If they wait around, it will be too late. One of the questions that needs to be asked of your conflict and of your plot as a whole is why now? Why is now the time to deal with the problem? This is especially true if the urgency forced upon the characters is causing them to lack resources or take on plans that aren't well thought out. A lack of time to do something is ultimately a resource limitation. Like if our brave knight has 10 years to slay the dragon, he can go off and raise an army and learn dragon slaying techniques from the world's foremost dragon slaying experts. He doesn't need to rush into things. But if the dragon is planning on eating the knight's love interest as its entree that evening, and the dragon's soup has just been served, then the heroic knight is not going to have time to come up with a great plan. They're going to have to rush forward and solve the conflict of the story. Being forced to come up with a plan in a short amount of time creates a lot of conflict. Conflict and interesting stories are built out of the limitations that you impose on your characters. Urgency, which is just the need to get something done in haste, is really just another limitation. Time is a resource that you can deny to your characters in service of conflict. Now, it's not just enough to impose urgency on the plot. There needs to be a good reason for that urgency. Why now is a really good question to ask, especially when it comes to stuff like character arcs. There's kind of a trope that I've seen in a few different stories where the character's like estranged brother or their estranged parent or someone will like randomly show back up in their lives after being gone for like decades. And then we learn the reason why that character chose to show back up is because they have like terminal cancer or something and they are literally running out of time. This is a good example of urgency. It's a good reason why the character is deciding to change now after they spent decades not changing. If you have a character who's suddenly making a decision to change or to do something different in their life, there needs to be a reason, something that tips them over that edge. And urgency can be a part of that. Urgency often will just kind of present itself based on how your plot plays out. If a character was just on the business end of a shotgun and are bleeding profusely, then you have an instant ticking clock and they should really see a doctor. If the big spring dance is only 4 weeks away, then there's urgency. If the blue pill only works for 30 minutes, then there's urgency. If the plane only has enough fuel to circle the airport for another 45 minutes, then there's urgency. A lot of very common plot situations just sort of create urgency on their own. Urgency is also not necessarily entirely related to time. Sometimes it can be related to a resource. The plane eventually running out of fuel is arguably related to time, but it's also related to a resource, the fuel. Your cowboy gunslinger hero only having 6 shots in their revolver or whatever is also an urgency because it's a limited resource. Another flavor of urgency is emotional urgency. Basically, if the conflict creates an unpleasant emotion for the character, then you can force them into a ticking clock situation. If the emotion is so unpleasant that feeling the emotion is really painful, then they can be spurred into action in order to make that emotion go away. If the detective knows deep down that the murder suspect committed the murder, then every minute that that scumbag is out walking the street is another minute that justice is being usurped. That feeling of justice not being delivered will be very upsetting for our justice-loving detective, and it could be strong enough to create a sense of urgency in the character and spur them into action without delay. This can happen with something like romance too. If either side of our shipping situation can't bear the thought of being away from the other, then that creates emotional urgency. Urgency can and probably should also cause problems for your characters. Acting in haste or not having a well thought out plan or not just taking a moment to calm themselves, take a breath, and think through a logical way to deal with a problem creates all sorts of conflict, and conflict is a good thing in your story. In the case of our justice-loving detective, they might rush through the interrogation or not collect enough evidence or give the DA too flimsy of a case because they are so desperate to bring a solution to the conflict that they don't take some time to patiently work through the problems. Urgency should cause problems for your characters, whether it's just a straight lack of resource issue or if it causes them to act in haste, go off half-cocked, and make a bunch of problems. However, a lack of urgency can cause just as many problems in your story. If your story lacks urgency, then it's going to lack tension. Tension needs urgency. The emotional weight of the conflict will be lessened because it will feel like the characters have all the time in the world. And if the characters are rushing to solve the problem when that problem could be solved 2 or 3 years from now, it's going to feel contrived. It's not going to feel right. It's going to feel like the characters are just acting out a plot for the sake of making a plot happen. I think a lack of urgency can also sometimes encourage sloppy writing. Urgency forces everything you write to be meaningful. There isn't time to wait around, so every scene, every sentence has to move things forward. If you don't have a good sense of urgency and the writing kind of meanders and you just kind of drift and there's not a lot of purpose to the scenes, then you're going to have a less enjoyable story. Now, you can take urgency too far, of course. Having a countdown timer for every single problem your characters encounter is going to become exhausting after a certain point. A lot of thriller type stories kind of suffer from this, where it's all urgency all the time and they're kind of exhausting to read, which is one of the reasons that a lot of thrillers tend to be shorter, because dealing with that heightened level of everything's always at a 10 out of 10 urgency gets really tiring to read if it's a longer story. You generally want very urgent problems that need to be solved right away, interspersed with periods of your novel where there's less urgency, where things slow down a little bit, where the tension lessens somewhat, and you give the readers and the characters a chance to breathe. Urgency will improve your story when your story lacks urgency. Just adding more urgency is not enough on its own. It's about having the right amount of it, not just adding more and more and more. Speaking of the right amount of something, this video has the right amount of length, and I've talked enough about its subject. So there you have it. If you have any urgent thoughts about urgency, please leave a comment down below. If you want to see more stuff like this, you can check out all my other writing advice related videos and subscribe to my channel. I post new videos three times a week. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time.